Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to really hear me on this because this is where so many women get it wrong. They hear about no contact and they think, oh, if I just stop texting him, if I just go quiet, then he'll magically come running back. And I'm here to tell you that ain't how it works. Silence by itself does nothing. Silence without purpose is just waiting. And waiting without purpose is desperation in disguise. You can sit on your phone all day, staring at the screen, counting the hours, scrolling through old messages, thinking that by not talking, he's going to feel your absence. That's not growth. That's a trap. That's teaching him that you're available for him emotionally, even if you're not messaging him physically. True power comes when your silence is paired with growth, when your quiet is not empty, but full of life, purpose, and self-respect. See, when a woman stops chasing a man, it's not enough to just sit back and wait for him to notice. That's called playing games, and games are for children. What really works is when you use that silence to become someone he cannot ignore. Because here's the truth, men are wired to notice presence, but they are equally, if not more, wired to notice change. And when you take your energy, your focus, your love, and put it back into yourself, into your goals, into your passions, into your happiness, you start to change. You start to radiate something that no amount of talking or texting could ever create. Growth is magnetic. Growth makes him notice whether he wants to or not, because it's not about forcing him to feel. It's about forcing him to confront the reality that you don't belong to anyone but yourself. And let me tell you another thing. Silence without growth will backfire every single time. If you go quiet, but your mind is consumed with him, if you're waiting by the phone, if you're imagining what he's thinking, you are still emotionally available. And men can feel that. A man can feel the desperation through 1,000 miles and 1,000 unread messages. So just going silent isn't enough. You need to be emotionally unavailable in a way that makes you stronger, not bitter. You need to stop existing in his orbit and start existing in your own solar system. You need to make your happiness dependent on yourself, not on whether he notices, responds, or regrets anything. That is what real silence looks like. That is what real power looks like. Here's another truth that people don't tell you. Silence paired with growth makes you unforgettable. A man can get used to you being there, used to your attention, used to your emotional labor. But when you step away and show him that life goes on, that your joy, your confidence, your energy are not tied to his approval, he starts to notice. And he doesn't just notice, he starts to reflect. He starts to remember the little things he took for granted, the laughs you shared, the way you made him feel seen. And here's the kicker you didn't chase. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You just grew. I want you to imagine a man who thought he had endless access to you, who thought he could take you for granted without consequence. Now he's left with silence, and silence paired with growth is a heavy thing. It's different from anger. It's different from drama. It's different from giving him the silent treatment while you stew. This is quiet confidence. This is showing him, without saying a word, that your life is rich, your energy is full, your focus is unshakable. And when he feels that absence in its full form, he starts to ask questions he never asked before. He starts to feel what he never felt when you were always available. And that's when the magic happens, not because you wanted him to feel it, but because your growth made it inevitable. So let me repeat this one more time so it sticks. Silence works only when it's paired with growth. If you just go quiet and wait, if you just stop messaging but stay emotionally present, you are doing nothing. You are teaching him nothing. But when your silence is filled with action, filled with life, filled with your own evolution, you are no longer a woman he can ignore. You are no longer a woman who is easy to take for granted. You are a force he cannot forget. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you go beyond no contact. That is how you become someone he remembers, someone he regrets losing, and most importantly, someone who knows her own value. Let me tell you something that most people don't understand about relationships. They think it's all about who talks more, who texts more, who shows up first. They think love is a contest of attention, but I'm here to tell you that's the fastest way to lose yourself and to lose respect. Men remember the woman who chose herself over begging, the woman who decided that her self-respect was more important than any argument, any apology, any explanation. Because here's the truth, a man does not respect someone who constantly proves their worth. A man remembers a woman who stood tall, who knew her value, and who refused to degrade herself just to get him to notice. That's the kind of woman who leaves a mark he cannot erase. See, too many women get caught up in trying to make a man love them, trying to force him to care, trying to convince him that he should be grateful for them. And I get it. I understand. Love makes you vulnerable. It makes you want to explain, to justify, to prove that you're worth keeping. But here's the problem. When you constantly justify yourself, you are teaching him that your love comes with a discount. You are teaching him that your attention, your care, your heart can be bought with persistence. And when that happens, no matter how much he likes you, no matter how much he even respects you in other ways, the part of him that respects a strong woman starts to fade. Respect is not negotiated. Respect is earned by your actions, by your standards, and by the way you hold yourself. Now, let me give it to you straight. Men never forget a woman who refused to lower her standards. Men never forget a woman who said, I am not going to chase you. I am not going to beg for your attention. I will love myself more than I love the idea of you. That woman becomes unforgettable because she stands out from the crowd. Most people around him are always giving, always compromising, always begging. But the woman who walks away without regret, without drama, and without apology, it hits him differently. He feels the weight of what he lost. He feels the emptiness where once there was your presence. And he has no choice but to remember you. Think about it for a second. When a man loses access to a woman who values herself, it creates reflection. Reflection is the thing people don't often talk about. Men may not call immediately. They may not show emotion right away. They may even pretend it doesn't matter. But inside, that absence makes him think. That absence makes him ask questions he never asked when you were always there. He starts remembering the way you laughed, the way you made him feel seen, the way you never compromised your dignity for temporary affection. And here's the kicker. He remembers that he cannot replace that. He cannot replace a woman who stands firm in her self-respect. That kind of memory lasts longer than anything else. And I want to be clear, this is not about being cold or unkind. Choosing self-respect over emotional begging does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you stop loving. It means you choose yourself first. It means you refuse to allow someone else's inconsistency or immaturity to define your worth. It means that instead of running after a man who cannot match your value, you invest in yourself, in your dreams, in your happiness, in your growth. And when you do that, men notice. They may not always say it. They may not always respond immediately, but they see it. And seeing it, they remember it. Here's another truth, men. Respect boundaries more than they respect words. You can talk all day about your worth, about how he should appreciate you, but if your actions don't reflect it, it's just noise. But when you set boundaries, when you say no without guilt, when you walk away from situations that compromise your dignity, that's what leaves an impression. That's what sticks. That's what makes a man remember you long after you're gone. Because he realizes that you are not just a fleeting presence. You are a standard. You are a level of self-respect he cannot ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who refuses to chase, the woman who refuses to beg, is not weak. She is powerful. She is the kind of woman who changes the way he sees love. She is the woman who teaches him, without saying a word, that love is not about possession. That love is about respect, and that respect is non-negotiable. And when he comes back, if he does, it's because he finally understands the value of what he lost. And if he doesn't come back, it doesn't matter, because you have already won by standing firm, by valuing yourself, by refusing to compromise your self-worth. So remember this, men will never forget the woman who chose herself over emotional begging. They may forget the arguments, they may forget the excuses, but they will never forget the strength, the dignity, and the self-respect that defined you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a power that no one can ever take away from you. That is a legacy that no one can erase. That is the woman who becomes unforgettable. Listen to me very carefully, because this is where a lot of women trip up when it comes to love. They think that the way to keep a man interested is to be everywhere all the time. They think that the way to make him care is to respond instantly, to answer his calls, to explain themselves over and over again. And I'm here to tell you that is not how attraction works. That's how desperation works. And let me be very clear, desperation is a killer. It kills attraction faster than anything else. If you are always available, always explaining, always justifying, always chasing, he's not thinking about you the way you think he should. He's thinking about how easy it is to have you. There's no curiosity. There's no longing. There's no respect. But detachment, true, confident detachment, that is magnetic. That is unforgettable. That is powerful. You see, detachment does not mean you stop caring. Detachment does not mean you stop loving. Detachment means you care enough about yourself to not let someone else's behavior define your happiness. It means you step back from the chaos. You step back from the constant need to prove your worth, and you create a space where he has to actually consider who you are. And let me tell you, when a man is left in that space, when he doesn't have immediate access to your attention, it triggers something inside him he hasn't felt before. Curiosity, questions, wondering what you're doing, who you're talking to, why you're not responding. And that's the key. Curiosity is the beginning of attraction. Desperation is the end of it. Now, think about it for a second. When a woman is desperate, she communicates a sense of lack. She communicates, I need you. I cannot live without you. Please stay. Please notice me. And here's the harsh truth. A man does not respect lack. A man does not value neediness. Neediness is the fastest way to make someone forget your worth. It makes your presence predictable. It makes your attention feel cheap. It removes the thrill. But when a woman is detached, not in a cold or mean way, but in a confident, self-respecting way, she communicates abundance. She communicates, I have a life, I have joy, I have value. If you are here, that's great. If you're not, my world keeps spinning. That shift, ladies and gentlemen, is unforgettable. Let me give you an example. Imagine a man who is used to a woman responding to his texts immediately, always available when he calls, always ready to drop everything for him. That becomes his expectation. That's his comfort zone. He doesn't have to think about her. He doesn't have to wonder about her feelings. He doesn't have to feel the weight of losing her. Now, imagine that same woman suddenly steps back. She doesn't ignore him cruelly, but she doesn't chase. She doesn't over-explain. She doesn't bend over backward for his approval. Suddenly, the space around her is different. Suddenly, he notices the absence. Suddenly, he starts asking questions. Why hasn't she called? Why isn't she reacting like she used to? What's going on with her? That, my friends, is curiosity. That is attraction being rebuilt. And the only thing that made it happen was her detachment. And here's another thing most people don't get. Detachment is not just about withholding attention. It's about reclaiming your energy. It's about putting your focus back on your own life, your own dreams, your own growth. When a man sees a woman thriving without him, when he sees her laughing, succeeding, living, and enjoying herself, it triggers reflection. It triggers a realization that he is no longer the center of her universe. And human nature is wired to notice loss and to question it. He starts to remember all the little things he took for granted. He starts to feel the pull of what he's missing. And that's the kind of power you cannot achieve through chasing, through begging, or through overexposure. Now, let me be clear, detachment is not a game. It is not manipulation. It is not a checklist of behaviors. It is a mindset. It is an understanding that your value is inherent, not dependent on how he treats you. It is knowing that your attention is precious, your love is precious, and it should never be given freely to someone who does not honor it. When you internalize that, you move differently, you act differently, you respond differently, and those differences are magnetic. Those differences are memorable. Those differences are what make him stop taking you for granted. And one more thing, ladies, desperation is loud and detachment is silent. Desperation screams for attention. It begs for validation. Detachment whispers strength. Detachment shows confidence. And confidence is the language men understand, whether they can put it into words or not. You don't need to text him, I'm okay, 1,000 times. You don't need to say, I'm fine, when you're not. You don't need to prove your worth with your tears or your explanations. Just living in your own power, detached, thriving, fully yourself, that communicates more than words ever could. That creates curiosity, that rebuilds attraction, and that makes you unforgettable. So remember this, detachment creates curiosity, desperation kills attraction. If you want him to remember you, if you want him to value you, if you want to go beyond no contact in a way that leaves him thinking about you long after you've moved on, you must embrace detachment. Stop chasing. Stop begging. Stop explaining. Start thriving. Start building your life. Start living in your own power. That is how you make a man notice you. That is how you make a man remember you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you become truly unforgettable. I need you to sit up and really pay attention, because this one right here is powerful. Too many women fall into the trap of thinking that if they just explain themselves enough, if they just justify their feelings enough, if they just tell a man everything about their heart, he will finally understand them. But I'm here to tell you, that's not how the human mind works, especially a man's mind. A man doesn't value what is constantly explained to him. In fact, the more you explain yourself, the less he thinks about you. The more you justify, the less weight your presence carries. But here's the magic: when you stop explaining yourself, when you refuse to break down your actions, your words, your feelings, when you stop over communicating your value, he has no choice but to start explaining you to himself. That's when the shift happens. That's when the spark he's been taking for granted suddenly becomes a question he cannot ignore. See, too many women believe that clarity equals connection. They think if they just explain themselves, he will finally get it. And I get it. It feels good to make someone understand, to lay it all out so there's no confusion. But let me break it down for you. Men think differently. Men process absence. Men process silence. Men process space. When you over-explain, when you tell him why you feel hurt, why you acted a certain way, why you need certain things, he stops thinking. He stops reflecting. He stops connecting the dots because you've given him the answers. You've removed the mystery. You've removed the emotional work. And men, believe it or not, respect the emotional work. They value the puzzle. They value the challenge. They value a woman whose mind and heart are not laid bare at every moment. Now imagine this scenario. You've been texting him, calling him, explaining yourself, clarifying misunderstandings, justifying your actions, hoping he sees how much you care. He nods, maybe says, "I understand," but nothing changes. The more you explain, the more he gets used to your presence, your attention, your emotional labor. He begins to take it for granted. And deep down, you start to feel frustrated because he's not appreciating you the way you deserve. That's when the power of stopping comes in. The power of silence. The power of refusing to explain every little thing. Because once you stop explaining yourself, something fascinating happens. He has to process your absence, your reactions, your decisions, your boundaries, all on his own. And men, when left with their own thoughts, begin to fill in the blanks. They begin to explain you to themselves. And what they often realize is that you are not just another woman. You are someone who has standards, someone who is independent, someone who cannot be easily taken for granted. Let me tell you, ladies, explaining yourself is a trap. It's a trap that keeps you small, keeps you available, keeps you waiting for approval. But when you stop, when you hold your dignity, when you allow yourself to exist without constant justification, you create space for him to reflect. And reflection is powerful. Reflection is the thing that builds respect. Reflection is the thing that builds longing. When a man starts explaining you to himself, he starts asking questions he never asked before. Why did she say that and not more? Why isn't she calling? Why doesn't she text like she used to? Why does it feel different? And those questions, those tiny, insistent questions, begin to change his perception. He begins to remember what he overlooked. He begins to feel the weight of your absence. And all of this happens without you saying a single word. Here's the real lesson. A man never truly values what is constantly explained. He values what he must process on his own. He values what requires him to think, to reflect, to feel the emptiness you leave behind. When you over-explain, you do the emotional work for him. When you stop explaining, you make him do the work. And let me tell you, a man who does the work to understand you on his own begins to remember you, begins to value you, and begins to realize your worth in ways that words could never communicate. Because actions, presence, absence, And boundaries speak louder than any explanation ever could. And let me be clear, this is not about being cold or manipulative. This is about self-respect. This is about valuing your own mind, your own heart, your own energy. It's about knowing that you are not responsible for someone else's understanding. You are not responsible for convincing a man of your value. Your job is to live your life, hold your standards, maintain your boundaries, and love yourself fully. When you do that, when you stop explaining yourself, he will start explaining you to himself. And when that happens, everything shifts. The power dynamics shift, the respect shifts, the attraction shifts, and the woman who was once taken for granted becomes unforgettable. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand this: a man who truly cares, a man who truly values you, will notice your detachment, your refusal to over-explain, your confidence in your own worth. He will feel the gap you create. He will start to process everything you represent without you saying a word. And that, my friends, is the difference between being forgotten and being unforgettable. That is the difference between a man taking you for granted and a man realizing he can never take you for granted again. So stop over-explaining. Stop justifying. Stop pleading for understanding. Live in your power. Live in your boundaries. And watch as he starts explaining you to himself. I need you to really pay attention to this, because this is the truth about relationships that nobody wants to tell you. A man will never, and I mean never, forget the woman who made him feel the loss of access. Not just the loss of her time, not just the loss of her attention, but the real loss, the loss of her presence, her energy, her heart. Too many women think that if they just keep giving, keep showing up, keep being available, then a man will finally wake up and appreciate them. And that's a lie. He will get used to it. He will start taking it for granted. He will start believing that it's his right to have you, to have your attention, to have your care. But when you create that absence, when you establish that boundaries and your life continues without him in the center, suddenly he notices. Suddenly he feels it. And that feeling is unforgettable. See, access is powerful. Access is everything. And humans, men especially, don't truly value something that is always there. They get comfortable. They take things for granted. They stop noticing. But the moment they can't just reach out and have it, the moment the access is gone, that's when the brain starts working. That's when the heart starts reflecting. And that is when a man begins to understand the value of what he has lost. Let me be clear, ladies, men are wired to feel absence more strongly than presence. They don't always feel appreciation when you're there, but when you step back, when you remove that constant availability, they feel a vacuum, and that vacuum becomes unforgettable. Now, too many women fear making a man feel that loss. They think, if I step back, if I stop answering, if I stop chasing, then he will move on. They think they'll be forgotten first. But the reality is the opposite. A man will remember the woman who did not fight to stay where she wasn't fully valued. He will remember the woman who walked away without regret, without drama, without begging. He will remember the woman whose life continued beautifully, who laughed, who thrived, who held her dignity, even when he wasn't present. Because absence forces reflection. Absence forces him to examine himself. Absence forces him to realize what he overlooked. And that, my friends, is a power that cannot be faked, that cannot be bought, that cannot be ignored. Think about it like this. A man is used to texting you, calling you, hearing your voice, seeing your face, feeling your presence. That becomes his comfort zone. He gets lazy in his attention. He stops putting in effort because he assumes it's always there. He stops noticing the little things because they've become ordinary. Now, imagine that suddenly that access is gone. You're not responding instantly. You're not available at all hours. You're not bending over backwards to accommodate his moods. Suddenly, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Suddenly, the little things he never paid attention to before start to matter. And that, ladies, is when he starts to remember. That's when he starts to feel longing. That's when he starts to realize that you are irreplaceable. And here's the thing, ladies, creating this sense of loss does not mean being cruel. It does not mean punishing him. It does not mean playing games. It means valuing yourself. It means understanding your worth. It means refusing to exist in someone's life in a way that diminishes your own power. A man never forgets a woman who honors herself, who refuses to compromise her dignity, who refuses to chase love that isn't fully reciprocated. He remembers the woman who, by her absence, reminded him of what he had taken for granted. And make no mistake, this is a lesson he will carry with him, whether or not he ever comes back. And let me be honest with you, this is where most women get it wrong. They fear the loss of a man more than they value themselves. They think, if I step back, if I create that absence, he'll leave forever. But let me tell you, a man who truly values, you will never forget the feeling of losing access to you. That's how respect is built. That's how longing is created. That's how attraction is reignited. It's not through constant explanation. It's not through overgiving. It's not through chasing. It's through stepping back and letting him feel the weight of what he has been missing all along. I want you to imagine a woman who has finally learned this truth. She stops chasing. She stops explaining. She stops giving access to her emotional energy for free. She focuses on her life, her growth, her happiness, her dreams. She laughs. She shines. She exists fully without needing his validation. And when he sees her like that, when he realizes that the woman he once assumed he had at his fingertips is no longer immediately available, he begins to feel the loss. And that feeling is unforgettable. That feeling is the kind of feeling that sticks with a man for the rest of his life. He will replay moments in his head, remembering the warmth of her presence, the joy she brought, the love she gave. He will feel the emptiness where she used to be. He will start to ask himself questions he avoided before. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of making a man feel the loss of access. Remember this, a man may forget words. He may forget promises. He may forget arguments. But he will never forget the woman who made him feel the absence of her presence, the lack of her attention, the loss of her energy. That is the kind of memory that changes men. That is the kind of memory that creates reflection. That is the kind of memory that leaves a woman unforgettable. And the best part, you don't have to do a thing. You don't have to beg. You don't have to chase. You just have to honor yourself, maintain your boundaries, and let the absence do the talking. Ladies and gentlemen, understand this access is precious. Your presence is valuable. Your energy is sacred. When you give it freely to someone who doesn't fully appreciate it, you lose power. But when you remove that access, when you step back, when you exist fully without him in the center of your universe, he feels it, he notices it, and he will never forget it. That is how a woman becomes unforgettable. That is how a man learns to value her. That is how you go beyond no contact and leave a lasting impression that cannot be erased. Ladies and gentlemen, listen closely, because this is where a lot of people completely misunderstand the power of no contact. They think no contact is just about stopping texts, ignoring calls, blocking numbers, or hiding on social media. They think it's some kind of trick to make a man chase them. But I'm here to tell you, no contact alone is nothing. Going beyond no contact means more than silence. It means becoming unavailable in spirit, not just in messages. It means stepping into a version of yourself that is fully alive and fully confident and fully independent. It means reclaiming your energy, your attention, and your life in such a way that a man not only notices your absence, but feels the weight of it in a way he can never forget. See, too many women think that if they just stop texting or calling, he will suddenly come to his senses. But here's the truth. If you stop messaging while your mind is still consumed by him, if your heart is still waiting, if your thoughts are still revolving around him, then nothing has changed. You may have created physical silence, but emotionally you are still fully present, and he can feel that. That is not power. That is waiting. That is still giving him access to your energy, your thoughts, your emotions, even when your messages are gone. True unavailability starts inside. It begins with your spirit. It begins with the way you move, the way you think, the way you carry yourself. It begins with the decision to live for yourself and nobody else. Going beyond no contact is about cultivating a life that is full, abundant, and rich without needing him to validate it. It's about waking up every day with your own purpose, your own goals, your own happiness. When you do this, your absence is not empty, it's vibrant, it's full, it's magnetic. Because a man doesn't feel a woman's absence when she's still emotionally waiting for him. A man feels a woman's absence when her life is so full, so thriving, so unshakably her own, that he cannot be a part of it without earning his place. That is when curiosity turns into longing. That is when reflection turns into respect. That is when attraction returns stronger than ever. Now, let me give it to you straight. Becoming unavailable in spirit is not about being mean. It's not about punishing him. It's not about playing games. It's about reclaiming your power and your peace. It's about refusing to let someone else's inconsistency or immaturity dictate your emotional state. It's about putting yourself first in a way that makes your presence optional, not guaranteed. And when you do that, when you truly live your life without waiting for him, something incredible happens. He starts to notice. He starts to feel. He starts to realize that he can't just step into your world whenever he wants. He starts to feel the weight of what he no longer has automatic access to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is unforgettable. Here's another truth that most women don't understand. Men are naturally territorial. When something they once had easy access to is suddenly unavailable, they take notice. And when you are unavailable in spirit, your energy, your attention, your very presence, they all become treasures he has to work to earn. He starts to ask questions he never asked before. Why isn't she reacting the way she used to? Why does her life seem so full without me? What am I missing? And those questions, they're the precursor to respect, the precursor to reflection, the precursor to genuine attraction. Because a man will never value what he can have too easily, but he will chase and remember a woman whose presence is powerful, intentional, and not guaranteed. Think about this. You could block him, stop responding, and go through all the motions of no contact. But if your energy is still tied to him, if your spirit is still waiting for validation, if your life still revolves around him in your mind, he will feel it. He will sense the desperation. And desperation, ladies, kills attraction. It doesn't build longing. It doesn't create curiosity. It doesn't make him remember you. But when you are truly unavailable in spirit, when you live your life fully without waiting for him, you flip the entire dynamic. Now, he's the one wondering, reflecting, missing longing. Now, he's the one thinking about how he took you for granted. And that shift, that moment of realization is priceless. Going beyond no contact also teaches you the value of boundaries. Boundaries are not just rules for him. They are rules for you. They define your self-respect. They define what you will and will not tolerate. They define the energy you will give and the energy you will protect. When you protect your emotional space, when you refuse to make yourself endlessly available, you signal to a man that your attention is not free. It is precious. It is earned. And that is one of the most powerful lessons a man can ever learn. A man who experiences that respect, that energy, that presence, it stays with him. It cannot be erased. It becomes part of how he remembers you. And let me tell you something else. Unavailability in spirit also creates freedom for you. Freedom to grow, freedom to heal, freedom to thrive, freedom to build your own happiness independent of him. You see, a lot of women get stuck in no contact because they are still waiting, still hoping, still emotionally chained to the man. That's not power. That's limitation. But when you go beyond no contact and become unavailable in spirit, you break those chains. You step into yourself fully. You reclaim your confidence. You reclaim your energy. And as you do that, you become magnetic in ways that messages and phone calls could never achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, understand this. Going beyond no contact is about becoming untouchable in your spirit. It's about being alive, thriving, confident, independent, and whole without needing him to complete you. It's about creating a life so full that your absence is loud, your presence is rare, and your energy is priceless. It's about living in such a way that a man cannot take you for granted, cannot ignore your value, and cannot forget the force that you are. And that, my friends, is the ultimate form of power. That is how you go beyond no contact. That is how you leave a man thinking, wondering, and remembering you long after you've moved on. So stop just being silent. Stop just blocking or ignoring. Stop just hiding behind the screen. Start living, start thriving, start shining. Start creating a life so rich that your unavailability is undeniable, unavoidable, and unforgettable. Because when you do that, when your spirit becomes untouchable, when your presence becomes earned, when your energy becomes sacred, a man will not just notice, you will be a memory, a lesson, and a standard he can never forget. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you go beyond no contact and truly become unstoppable.